Hey there, today we're going to be going over the most dangerous game key passages plus skills practice. So the skills that we're going to be covering today are main idea and context clues, but what we want to try to do is we want to try to use these skills in order to wind up at some conclusions about Rainsford. So we're looking at trying to discover how Rainsford has changed from the beginning of our story all the way up until the end of our story. So let's get started. For this first section, we're going to be focusing on main idea. So it's going to give you a quote from Rainsford and a quote from General Zaroff. What you want to decide on first is what the topic of the passage is, and then take a stab at what you think the main idea is. Now, if you remember, when you are testing the main idea, you need to be able to find details that prove that main idea in the passage. So we're going to do this column together, so the one about Rainsford or the quote from Rainsford, and then you're going to attempt to do the quote from General Zaroff on your own. So here's the quote from our guy Rainsford. This comes at the beginning of the story when he's talking with his buddy Whitney, so this is before he falls off the ship when they're on their way to a hunting trip to hunt jaguars. "Don't talk rot, Whitney," said Rainsford. "You're a big game hunter, not a philosopher. Who cares how a jaguar feels?" "Perhaps the jaguar does," observed Whitney. "Bah! They have no understanding." "Even so, I'd rather think they understand one thing, fear. The fear of pain and the fear of death." "Nonsense," laughed Rainsford. "This hot weather is making you soft, Whitney. Be a realist. The world is made up of two classes, the hunters and the huntees. Luckily, you and I are hunters." All right, so here we're trying to focus specifically on Rainsford and his belief systems. So if you're asking yourself, okay, what are they talking about here? Remember, for topic, it's one or two words. So you can pause the video and go ahead and type in what you think the topic of this passage is. Now, you can choose different topics and most likely arrive at the same place. So you may have said hunting, you may have said classes. I'm going to go with the word hierarchy for my topic. When I say hierarchy, I mean a system of ranking individuals. So in this case, Rainsford thinks that because he is a hunter, he obviously ranks himself above the jaguar. But it's also interesting here that he says the world is made up of two classes. So he doesn't just say, like, I'm a hunter and a jaguar is an animal, so I have the right to hunt it. He's saying the world is made up of two classes, making it seem as though he's not just referring to hunting here. He thinks he's, part of the upper class of society. So it's interesting that he words it, there are two classes of people in this world, or there are two different groups in this world, the hunters and the huntees. And so obviously he sees himself with power here. So I'm going to ask myself to come up with the main idea. I'm going to say, okay, well, if I said the topic was hierarchy, what do I think the main idea is? So what is this passage saying about hierarchy or hunting or the class system? So again, even if you didn't pick hierarchy as your topic, you just ask yourself, whatever you said the topic was, go ahead and say, okay, what about the topic is this passage saying? So go ahead and pause the video and take a stab at the main idea. All right, so your main idea should say something along the lines of Rainsford believes that there is a hierarchy in the world and he sees himself at the top. Now, you might have worded this a little differently. You may have said Rainsford believes he can hunt animals because he's a hunter and he has power. That could also work. So your main idea just has to stress that Rainsford believes that he is at the top, both social class or at the top as a hunter as well. So if you were unsure how to do this, you can go with the main idea that's stated here, but just understand that your main idea doesn't have to be word for word what my main idea is, but just make sure it's covering the same ideas, that Rainsford believes there's some sort of class system or hierarchy in the world, and he sees himself on the top of that class system or hierarchy. All right, next, we're going to highlight details that prove our main idea. So when you're doing this, you want to just highlight any details that shows Rainsford believes that he is on top of the social hierarchy, both when it comes to hunting and also maybe when it comes to the real world. So take a minute and go ahead and highlight your details. Okay, so the details that I've highlighted are who cares how the jaguar feels, they have no understanding, And then I think the most significant detail that proves the main idea is that the world is made up of two classes, the hunters and the huntees. Luckily, you and I are hunters. Again, reinforcing this idea that Rainsford sees himself at the top of both the hunting hierarchy and then also the social hierarchy. All right, so this last question on the table says, what does this passage tell us about Rainsford? So based on what the main idea is of the passage, are there any other conclusions we can draw about Rainsford? Go ahead and type your response. You can pause this video and then see if that matches up with some of the conclusions that I drew. All right, so for this section, what I said was this tells us that Rainsford views himself as someone with power. He especially sees himself as someone with power over animals. As a result, he does not think he should have to worry about how the animal he is hunting or animals he is hunting feel. All right, so once you've done this side, go ahead and move to this quote from General Zaroff. You're going to walk through this same process, and you can use the table to the left, so the column to the left, to help you out with this General Zaroff passage here. Now, once you've completed that, look at what you put down for the main idea for both characters and what you learned about both characters, and write a quick response. So this should be in complete sentences, just a couple are fine. It says, how are these two characters similar and how are they different? So this should be at least 2 to 4 sentences where you explain what makes these two men similar and what makes them different. In this next passage, what we're going to be looking at is trying to figure out what the word prolonged means, but also in using that context clues process, trying to come up with a conclusion in regards to how Zaroff became a man okay with hunting humans. The general filled both glasses and said, God makes some men poets, some he makes kings, some beggars. Me he made a hunter. My hand was made for the trigger, my father said. He was a very rich man with 250,000 acres in the Crimea, and he was an ardent sportsman. When I was only 5 years old, he gave me a little gun, specially made in Moscow for me, to shoot sparrows with. When I shot some of his prized turkeys with it, he did not punish me. He complimented me on my marksmanship. I killed my first bear in the Caucasus when I was 10. My whole life has been one prolonged hunt. I went into the army. It was expected of a nobleman's son, and for a time commanded a division of the Cossack cavalry. But my real interest was always the hunt. I have hunted every kind of game in every land. It would be impossible for me to tell you how many animals I have killed. All right, so step 1 here is figuring out what the heck this passage is talking about. So what is the main focus of this passage? We're going to go ahead and type that into step 1. All right, so we might say something along the lines of hunting is General Zaroff's passion, and he has been doing it since he was a young boy. Step 2, we want to figure out the job of the word, so that's what it's doing in the sentence. Now, we can use the parts of speech to help us out here, or we could just explain what it's doing. So what I would say here is that prolonged is describing the word hunt. So you could also put that as an adjective describing the word hunt. Either way, let's go ahead and put that down for step 2. All right, let's move to step 3 where we're trying to decide on the connotation. So that's the feeling behind the word. I killed my first bear in the Caucasus when I was 10. My whole life has been one prolonged hunt. So it doesn't seem like there's a strong feeling one way or the other here, so we're going to go ahead and just put neutral for step 3. I could also see if someone were to argue positive, because obviously he's talking about hunting and the hunt, and he has a very positive view on hunting. All right, so step 4, we're solving and replacing. So whatever word we pick needs to be able to replace prolonged in this sentence and make sense. So it needs to be a descriptive word or an adjective. It needs to make sense in the sentence. He's also, if we pay attention here, he's talking about how he's shot turkeys at a young age. He killed a bear when he was 10. So he's talking about my whole life has been one blank hunt. And then he talks about going into the army. All right, so see if you could find a word that you think best replaces prolonged in this sentence. One word that I might say could replace prolonged in this sentence is continuous. right? And that's because he's talking about how he started hunting at a young age. He continues to hunt throughout his adolescence, all the way into his adulthood. He then talks about how it'd be impossible to tell Rainsford how many animals he's killed in his lifetime. So his entire life has been a hunt. Now, for this next main idea section, you are trying to figure out what the main idea of this passage. And step 4 is a little bit different here. So it's going to ask you to explain how this passage helps the reader better understand why General Zaroff is okay with hunting humans. So by the end of figuring out this main idea process, you want to come to a conclusion that answers this particular question. Now, this last section here, the end of the story, Rainsford makes a comment to Zaroff. So Zaroff's trying to congratulate him. He's trying to say, oh, you've won the game. And Rainsford says, I'm still a beast at bay. And he says this in a low, hoarse voice. He then challenges General Zaroff by saying, get ready, General Zaroff. So to figure this out, we need to kind of break this down. So you probably know what the word beast means. Maybe look up if you're not sure what at bay means. Go ahead and Google that. And then try to put it all together. What might he be trying to say when General Zaroff is like congratulating him, saying he's won? And basically Rainsford's like, no, I'm still a beast at bay. He does not feel like he's won the game. And then he challenges General Zaroff. So step 2 is done for you. And it says this is a metaphor. It's a comparison between two things that are basically unlike but have something in common. Rainsford is comparing himself to a beast at bay. So we're trying to figure out what that possibly means. So you're going to say big picture, what's happening in this passage? Decide whether beast at bay is a good or bad thing. So is it positive, negative, or neutral? And then try to explain what Rainsford means when he says this comment. And then the last part of this is going to be trying to address how Rainsford has changed since the beginning of this story. And you have to decide whether or not you think he will become the next Zaroff based on details that we pointed out in this activity and then also details that we found while reading the story. All right, that's it for the Most Dangerous Game Key Passages assignment. If you have any questions, make sure you reach out to your teacher.